Exercise your power. I love it. All right. It's fabulous to see all of you. I hope you're having a great day. Let's continue our discussion of the Homeric myths, what we know, and now tonight, what we don't know, in both a literal and playful way. And then we're going to segue to the emergence of Greek tragedy. And I want to talk about some historical things that were, they must have been very, very influential in the emergence of Greek tragedy. And then I want to talk about Greek tragedy as a type of stylization, an artistic or aesthetic stylization of the Homeric legacy, of the Homeric traditions, okay? And that will help us understand what Nietzsche means by tragedy, how he understands it as operating, and in a way, why he thinks it produces these emotionally fierce, intellectually creative people, and how from that worldview and those people come extraordinary lives and works of art, like Sophocles' Antigone. All right, so that's kind of that's the project for tonight. And I want to pick up where we left off on Tuesday. And we are talking about the Homeric traditions. And we have to do that because, as we said on Tuesday, for Nietzsche, this is really the beginning of Western civilization. And it's not just the beginning technically for Nietzsche of Western civilization, in the sense that the Iliad and the Odyssey kind of miraculously appear in print and become rewritten, right? And therefore creating the kind of foundation from which the Greek world emerges and from which Western civilization emerges. We're going to talk about it as best we can in that sense. And that's incredibly important for Nietzsche, because he thinks that what's happening at this time and how the Greeks of the tragic age stylize this and perfect this is profound. It's critical. In fact, this is a kind of secret wisdom for Nietzsche, to becoming emotionally strong and intellectually creative, and ultimately becoming free from nihilism and self-hatred and depression and misery. So this is, we're talking some empirical and historical things, but we're also talking some important conceptual things for Nietzsche. And then we got to see how the Greeks of the tragic age, who live 200-300 years after we think Homer lived, how they stylize that, how they in their own kind of heroic, right, and tragic perspective, stylize their own tradition, and in the process create something new and powerful and even more beautiful, even more sublime. And so we'll talk about that today. Now, we were talking on Tuesday as best we could about the Homeric traditions in a kind of straightforward academic way, or intellectual way, or historical way, right? We were really trying to talk about them, talk about Homer as if he, she, or they were real people, talk about him as if we knew when the poem emerged, talk about it in terms of why it was important, why is Homer monumental, even to Western civilization, even without Nietzsche, because, you know, the Iliad and the Odyssey are the first two written epic poems, and they're rewritten, right? They're the first written and rewritten epic poems that emerge out of an oral tradition, a now long lost and forgotten oral tradition, right? And how the Iliad and the Odyssey become these kind of foundational texts. And so we were talking about them in that way as best we can, right? And that's useful, it's important, right? obviously, as I said, really important for Nietzsche. But even if we hadn't read Nietzsche or didn't care about Nietzsche's interpretation of the Homeric traditions and how the Homeric traditions become Greek tragedy, even if we didn't care about that, we would still have an interest generally in the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer and the Homeric traditions, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and that. We would have a kind of standard academic or intellectual or historical or anthropological kind of interest in these things. And so I kind of wanted to talk about them on that level. Now, we began to segue, and I gestured a little bit to some of this already in Tuesday, but we started to segue to this. Now I want to shift to a kind of more deeply conceptual treatment of the Homeric traditions, as well as a playful. And I mean playful both in a deep and a playful way, right? There's something kind of playful and liberating in this. And so now I want to turn to the Homeric traditions from a more nominalist or postmodern or Nietzschean sense, right? In both conceptually, what does this mean? Why is it important? And why is it playful? And why is it liberating? And ultimately, how does this influence really what Nietzsche and Foucault are going to argue are going on with our own human consciousness, our own subjectivity, our own identity, our own history, and the way our own identity and our own moment in a historical and political time and place is related to this. So bear with me, right? And I've typed it all out for you. So listen, read along, take notes if you want, but I really want to tell you a story. And in telling this story, lay or open up insight to important postmodern themes. All right, so what the hell am I talking about? So Western society, Western history, professors, bookstores, all use the name Homer as if we knew who it referred to. If you go on Amazon and you Google Homer's Iliad, there it is. There's in bold type Homer. He's the author of the Iliad. He's the author of the Odyssey, the first two written and rewritten epic poems. Okay. If you go to a Western civilization class at CSUN, they're going to assign Homer. They're going to put on the syllabus, read Homer, read passages from the Iliad and the Odyssey. We talk, as I just did last week, in an academic way about a Homeric period, right? I put on the outline. Well, the Homeric period was 750 to 650 BC. So we talk like Homer was a real person. We talk like we have this sense that, well, you know, it's hard to kind of date, but yeah, you know, 750 to 650, that's the Homeric period. And we talk about Homer as a real person. And we talk about a time in which this real person lived. In many ways, in the same way that we talk about ourselves as being a real person. Yeah, Nick Dundy's a real person. I am. And he's living at the end and the collapse of the modern liberal political philosophical experiment. He was born in 1966. He's got a couple of years, the way he drinks, he's got a couple of years left, right? So the Dungy period, 1966 to 2025, the Dungy period. They'll talk like that one day. Actually, what they're going to say is they're going to say after Dungy 80. Everything will be after Dungy. They'll be before Dungy, and then they'll be after Dungy. So, yeah, I'm clearly Nero tonight. I've just lost my mind. So we talk about Homer as if he was a real person. We talk about the Homeric period as if we have some sense of really when this was. And again, I want to be serious and playful at the same time, because this is profound. When we talk about Homer as a real person, when we talk about the period, this 100 years of this, when we talk about ourselves as being real, Nick Dungy's real, here I am, and Nick Dungy's a real person. And our historical period is real. Here it is. The modern age begins in the 1500s. It's now coming to an end. The reign of Nick Dungy, of Emperor Mute, began in 1966 and it went to 2025 until his students all rose up in frustration and stabbed him like Caesar. Right? We talk, but we talk as if we know these things. We talk as if they're real and then / true. And we talk as if we know them. We talk as if we know these things, both casually and seriously. And we expend a lot of energy. Professors, see how damn big that library is? Well, when we used to go to CISA, that library was so damn big that they had to put the books somewhere else in these baskets that these little machines come and bring. Right? For hundreds of years, people have written books about these things. This. However, as we gestured last week, in both an empirical way and a conceptual way, we have no idea. Listen, we don't fucking know what we're talking about. Now, we talk the way we do because it's useful. If we didn't talk the way we did, yeah, Homer was a real person. He or she or they were the author of these 2 poems, and this is kind of when they lived. If we didn't talk like that, then we could never talk, because how would we begin the conversation, right? So, okay, I get it. I get it. I understand why we talk like that, in a way. But the truth, if I can use truth in a playful way, since this whole damn class is about the fucking existence of truth. But the truth is, the academic truth, the historical truth, the archaeological truth, the anthropological truth, the scientific truth, the carbon dating truth, is we have no idea. Zero. We have no knowledge. Zero knowledge. Zero archaeological knowledge. Zero historical knowledge. Zero intellectual knowledge. Zero academic knowledge. Whether or not Homer was a real person, we have no fucking idea. Pardon my language. Zero. There's a huge debate about whether Homer was a real person, whether he was a man or she was a woman, or whether there was a group of roaming poets, the Homerics. We don't even know where the word comes from. We have literally no, it's a fucking guess. It's an invention. The idea that Homer was a real person, that this real person wrote these poems, is a fiction. We have no knowledge. All we have is what Herodotus wrote 200 years later. And then what Plato wrote, or Sophocles wrote, or what Aeschylus wrote, or Sophos, or later Aristotle. All we have are things written about something, a person, or a group of people, or an area. Some people say Homer didn't refer to people at all. It referred to an area from which the poems which we no longer understand because it's been lost in time and space and historical memory. We have no knowledge. Zero. It's a fiction. Again, a useful fiction to be sure. Okay, I get it. But we run around talking like it's not a fiction. We run around talking as if we know these things. In our self-certainty, in our enlightenment, PhD, social sciences, and in our history, in our classical studies, and our carbon dating, the archaeologists are out there digging up the fucking rocks and die a day. Okay, it's useful, it's good. Keeps me employed. Thank God, my wife would kill me. But we don't know. We have zero knowledge about who Homer was, or even when the Homeric period took place. Some scholars think the Homeric period goes back as far as 1200 BC. Some link it to 1200 to 800 BC. Others link it from 750 to 650, the date I gave you. Herodotus places Homer, the great Greek historian Herodotus, the first historian of the Greek world, who happened again to live simultaneously. He was earlier than Aeschylus and Sophocles, but Herodotus was alive between 480 and 425. Dates the Homeric era to 850 BC. So even the first person who writes about Homer that we know of in the 400, 480, 425 BC locates Homer 400 years before. 400 years. So we don't have any idea. We have no knowledge about who Homer was, if he was a real person. He, she, or they. If he, she, or they were real people, we don't know. The idea that they were real people is a fiction. And therefore a human what? In a way, from a Nietzschean point of view, it's a kind of human what?
Invention.
Human invention.
Invention.
It's a human invention. It's a kind of art. It's artificial. It's art. And in this fascinating way, it's not just artificial and a human invention. It's also a kind of an assertion of what?
Power.
Power. Let me tell you the story. Yeah, Homer was this guy. Oh no, Homer was this woman. Or Homer was these group of traveling ballad minstrel poets who collectively hammered out the Iliad and the Odyssey, and somehow it got reiterated. And gee, somehow that became the foundation of the Greek world. They fucking invented the Greek world. And from that, Western civilization came. So can we own it's a fiction? Can we own it? Can we look at our own history, the source of the Greek world and the Western civilization? Can we bear witness to it and own it as a kind of fiction? And as a kind of power. It's an assertion of power. And again, and I'll bore you guys to tears for the next 10 weeks, because I keep repeating this. It's not just a fiction because we don't know. And so whatever we know, we get from people who weren't there. We have no whatever scientific evidence or historical evidence means, it doesn't mean what we think it means. It isn't what it promises to be. So whatever we have is a fiction. And not only is it a fiction, not only is it an art, not only is it a kind of fiction, important, a hugely important fiction, don't get me wrong, but fiction nonetheless. Not only is it a fiction, it's also simultaneously an assertion of what? Power. Why is it an assertion of power? Because in being a fiction, It invents, it gives the name, it gives the meaning, it gives the hierarchy of values and the directionality of purposes. It invents what becomes the Greek world. That's power. Anytime you name, you define, you assign value, and therefore structure and a range of possibilities, that's power. And don't tell me it's not. It's power. And by the way, you guys know it's power because we're in a cultural and political space that's coming apart. Where the conflict, the real conflict, the human, the meaning, the moral, the value, the political conflict over who's going to name what you and I are. Who's going to assign the meaning of your gender, the meaning of your race, the meaning of your sexuality, the meaning of your socioeconomic value, the meaning of your placement in the constellation of possibilities. Don't tell me you don't know it's not power. But yeah, it's power. And I know you know because you're on the street right now. The Black Lives Matter protests, the police oppression protest. You're out there. What are you doing on the street? You're protesting. You're saying we don't want this meaning. We don't want this value. I don't want to be structured within this range of possibilities called paternalism and called misogyny and called racism and called white supremacy. I don't want that. So you know damn well what this is in a way. At some point, in some moment in the history which we can't know, which we will never know, these poems emerged. And then we said, oh, they're poems, so maybe a human being had to write them, and it was probably a man. Oh, okay, and there's some kind of oral tradition or some extant fragments. Homer, I'm not even sure where the word Homer comes from. Okay, that dude was called Homer. And maybe he lived, we'll just guess, because it's useful. Herodotus said 850 BC. Most contemporary scholars say 750 to 650 BC. Aristotle, 300 years later, says Homer was the teacher of the Greeks. Homer invented the Greeks. Okay, there's a narrative here. But it's a fiction. And because it's a fiction, it's an assertion of power. And because it is a fiction and an assertion of power, because it is a human meaning of meaning, value, and purpose, created, I guess, by humans. It had to, I guess. We just don't know who that human was. And because it sets in motion words like courage and Achilles and Paris and Helen and honor and service and power, because it sets in motion a set of words with a certain meaning and certain values. It invents a reality, and literally we call that reality the Greek world. It invents the Greek world. There's no Greek world before the Iliad and the Odyssey. Didn't exist. And there's no objective truth that there's some Greek world out there that we're waiting to discover. It's an invention. And not just conceptually as an invention, the Greek, Homeric, later tragic conception of courage or heroism or love or friendship or betrayal. Yeah, just look up Achilles, betrayal. It's just an invention of a whole system of values. And then purposes. But the point is, we don't know anything about it. We are literally dancing with shadows all the time. So, at the very core of Western society, we have no knowledge of the origins or temporality of Western society, and we have no knowledge of the author. Right? Now, again, just to just torture you. This is important to remember. Because from another point of view, I guess from a necessary point of view, otherwise you can't start the conversation, but from another point of view, we often talk as if we know the origin. Oh yeah, the origin of Western civilization? Yeah, okay, Homer, 750, 650 BC, yeah. Oh, and who was the author? Oh yeah, it's that dude. Yeah, Homer. We talk like we know, but we don't. And we don't because we can't. This is the important thing. We don't. We talk like we know the origin. We talk like we know the center. We talk like we know the foundation. Just like we talk about, well, of course I know my origin. I'm born in 1966. Working class parents. Father was in the mafia, killed people for money. True story. Mom had a high school education. White, Protestant, working class kid in Southern California. Raised by a mother on welfare. All right, that's my origin, that's the origin. And then I guess if you wanted to put back, oh, well, he's made in the image of God. So there's even better, there's an origin. And I got a name, and talk like Nick Dungy's a real thing, an objectively real thing that can be knowable. Talk like all of that. The fact is, with respect to Homer, the Homeric period, the origins of the Greek world, and therefore the origins of Western civilization, we know nothing. At the center of Western civilization is an abyss. And now I'm speaking directly in Nietzschean language. At the center of Western civilization is nothing. There's nothing. It's an abyss. And we know, and we can speculate in a playful way that it's an abyss because we know, right? Because we know that whoever Homer was and whatever the Iliad and the Odyssey are, they're fictions. They're fictions. So at the very center of Western civilization is an abyss, is nothing. There is no center. That's the key. Western metaphysics, Platonic metaphysics, Christian metaphysics, Enlightenment, normative, social, medical, and behavioral sciences, all of those systems are obsessed with the center. Where's the center? Where's the center of Nick Dungy? Where's the true center of Nick Dungy? It's the soul, or is it his reason? Where's the center? Where's the center of the biological creature understood in Enlightenment science? It's the DNA. It's the bioneural complexes in the process that give phantasma called consciousness and then direct intentionality. There's a center. We're obsessed with the center. Metaphysics is obsessed with the center. It has to have a center because it has to know who it is. It has to know from whence it emerges and from whence it emerges as something true. It's obsessed with the center. It's obsessed with the origin. But at the origin of Western society, there's no center. There's an abyss. There's nothing. At the center of Western civilization, there is an abyss and there's no author. There's no author. We think there's an author. His name's Homer. And we call him an author because we think he wrote some books. And it's a very useful thing. Just like it's useful to say that there's a center, there's an objectively true center to Nick Dungy. It's called his reason or soul in his Christian metaphysics. Right? Right? He's got an origin, born in 1966 or made in the image of God or something. Right? And this objectively true, centered origin identifiable fucking thing called Nick Dungy writes books, bad ones as they turn out, and we call him an author. Yeah, Nick Dungy wrote that fucking book. In fact, I'm such a bad author that I have to assign other people to read it or they wouldn't buy my book. That's how bad of an author I am. So they call me an author because I write books. But as Nietzsche will say, and as we will see with Foucault, that's a fiction. Nick Dungy's a fiction. And the whole idea of the author is a kind of strange idea, given what language is, how it operates, and how meaning and words and meaning and values are produced as human inventions. All right, so we don't know. At the center of Western civilization, there is no center. It's an abyss. There's nothing. And there's no author. The author in postmodernism, this is what they read. If you hear Nietzsche, or if you read something in Nietzsche where they talk about the decentered author, or Judith Butler loved to talk about the decentered author, Derrida loved to talk about the decentered author. Foucault wrote a whole book challenging the whole idea of the author. Right? How fabulous that is, right? Think about that, right? But there's no author. Authorship is decentered. And I'm boring you with this because this is going to play a critical role in what postmodernism is. The emotional strength and the kind of intellectual openness to bear witness to that possibility that there is no origin. The origin is nothing, there's an abyss. And that even though we talk, and by the way, it's important that we talk this way, I get it, that Nick Dungy's, I'm real, I'm speaking. And we talk about Nick Dungy as a real thing, but from a postmodern point of view, one, they're suspicious of the existence of objective truth out there, and therefore they're also suspicious of the claim of their objectively true self. So in a Nietzschean Foucaultian notion, what we call a centered, objectively true essence to Nick Dungy, or reason or soul or bioneural processes, right? That's a fiction too. And that at the center of Nick Dungy, there's no center. Nick Dungy's decentered. That's what Nietzsche will mean when he says identity or subjectivity is decentered. It's what Foucault means when he says identity or subjectivity is constructed. It's constructed in and through language. It's an effect of power. Language understood as power. What is language? How does it operate? So we're having fun here. This is playful in a sense, because we run around thinking that Western civilization has an origin. We run around thinking that the two seminal founding texts of Western civilization, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were written by a real person who is an author. And we build this whole kind of thing. And then we say, oh, and then, a couple hundred years later, Socrates and Plato show up and say, oh, that Homer and those Greek tragedians, they had it all wrong. There's an objective truth. And they're cool. It's cool to read all that stuff. They had it wrong. And this is now the truth of Western civilization. And we talk like that. And it's useful that we talk like that. But the truth is, it's a fiction. Talking like that is a fiction. We don't know shit about the origin part of my language. And by the way, we can't, as we will see soon. We can't, because we can't get outside the language. You can't get outside the poem. That's why they won't find what they're looking for. They can't. Because the Iliad and the Odyssey open up the fiction of Homer. The Iliad and the Odyssey open up the fiction of the Greek world. And the fiction of the Greek world opens up Western civilization, first Greek tragedy, and then Socratic and Platonic metaphysics. And then the Neoplatonists And then the Roman humanists, the Stoics and Seneca, right? Aurelius, Cicero. And then New Testament Christianity comes along. And now science. We're in a poem. We're in a fiction. And how do you get outside the fiction to look behind the fiction? You can't. You and I are in a poem. And it's not just that we're in a poem, we are constructed by the poem. So you and I are never going to get outside of our construction to look behind the goddamn construction to find the origin, the pure origin, the real origin, the original origin. Can't. It's not possible. Now, I'm playing on two levels simultaneously. One, we're playing with the Homeric myths as they set in motion, as they give a word to, a meaning and a value to what becomes the Greek world, and how that gets set in motion. But we're also, and this was the playful part, the serious and playful part, but we're also using that very, and we're going to talk about this for the rest of the class, but we're using it very slowly now to make parallels with the construction of our own subjectivity and our own historical time. To see it, to begin the process of seeing that, seeing you and I as constructions, and our historical time as a kind of poem that really has no origin, is an assertion of power, and which is ultimately, like all nominalist, aesthetic accounts of meaning, value, and purpose, because it's a human invention, because it's an assertion of power, it is very contingent, right? Contingent and unstable. It's constantly undergoing change and transformation. So I'm trying to draw a kind of I'm trying to begin the process of easing us into seeing ourselves in that way. There's no center. There's no pure origin, and subjectivity is decentered. And by the way, I'll just say this quickly, I'm going to let it go. If you want some existential kind of evidence for this, and God forbid, don't take this too far, but and this is a continuum, but when people have acute panic attacks or acute anxiety attacks, really, the real ones, they're terrifying. They're terrifying because you are becoming aware as it quickens that in some ways your mind is what? It's coming apart. For whatever reason, whatever it is that sets you in that motion. Your mind's coming apart. And it's terrifying because as the mind coming apart increases speed and celerity and swiftness, you get this, you get this kind of empty feeling. You hear this kind of sucking sound. And you are starting, the terrifying part and the panic part is that you are starting to glimpse nothingness. You are starting to glimpse nothingness. Your mind's coming apart. You're having an acute anxiety attack. You're having an acute panic attack. And you start to feel, but physiologically, the body starts to sway. It gets vertigo. It's literally an existential vertigo. Whatever sense of center you thought you had was a fiction. It's coming apart. And literally the body will sway in this kind of vertigo. And then it happens in the mind. And you're getting flashing synaptic visions of fucking nothingness. right? Because as the words and as the meanings and the values that have kind of constructed your mind, who is Nick Dungy? Where does he live? What does he think and do? Who's he married to? As all this sort of stuff kind of unravels, it unravels into what? It unravels into nothing. Just like cultures unravel into nothing. Yeah, some things come and replace them and a new paradigm emerges, but cultures unravel into nothing. There are parts of the Roman Empire still living on, absolutely. But the culture unraveled into nothing. So at the center of Western civilization, there is no center. At the origin of Western civilization, there's no origin. Because what we call the Greek world, what we call Western civilization, was a kind of fiction. Now, again, another key point, you can write this down. Existentially a necessary fiction. Existentially a necessary fiction, because without the fiction, there's no meaning, there's no word, there's no meaning, there's no value. So existentially an absolutely necessary fiction. And ultimately a heroic fiction, because it's through that fiction that you and I learn from a certain gaze and already inside the poem to begin the process of giving our life meaning, of giving our life value, of finding the emotional courage to enter the realm of agon, of meaning and value and purpose. Because if you don't, someone's going to impose it on you. And again, you don't need me to tell you that. It's already freaking happening. That's what all this shit is about. What is gender identity about? What is resistance to white supremacy about? What is resistance to patriarchy and misogyny about? All these things are about meaning and the source of the meaning, and they're about value. What these things, how we rate and value these things, and who decides, and how they decide, and what are the consequences to our minds and bodies of politics, who decides. That's what all this is about. You're always already in the game, whether you know it or not. But make no mistake, there is, at the origin of Western civilization, there's no origin, there's nothingness, there's an abyss. The center of the author, the center, the objective center of the person, of the author, there's no author. It's decentered. Nick Dungy's real, but there's nothing objectively true about Nick Dungy. What Nick Dungy is a kind of constellation, a moving, transformative constellation of words and meanings and associations and values in this kind of field of power relations opened up by words. So Nick Dungy's real, but he's not true. And Nick Dungy can come fucking unraveled. There's no center to Nick Dungy. If Nick Dungy doesn't hold together the ideas, the words and the meanings and the values, then come apart. Now, for God's sake, keep it together. I'm not suggesting to any of you deconstruct it just for fucking fun. Don't do that. It's fucking painful. It's horrific. That's why we spend so much time and energy keeping our fucking minds together. That's what discipline is. That's what self-discipline is. That's what emotional discipline, rational self-discipline, that's what it is. It's the process by which we keep ourselves from fucking unraveling. But we call it success in the academic world. Okay, no problem. All right. 3 major points to take away from this part of the discussion. 1, for Western civilization, there is no pure origin. There's no pure blood. There's no pure race. There's no pure origin. It's all fiction. Race is a fiction. Ethnicity is a fiction. Blood is a fiction. They're all constructions. For Western civilization, there is no pure origin. There's no pure race. There's no pure word. There's no pure blood. 2, there is decentered authorship. This is critical. This is really critical. For subject, and when I use the word authorship in this way, I can also mean just put a slash there and put subjectivity / identity. There is decentered subjectivity. Nick Dungy's real, in a sense. I'm talking to you, right? And you are understanding, hopefully, what I'm saying, right? And you talk back to me like I'm real. And that's true, in a way. But when I say that there's decentered subjectivity, what we mean in a postmodern sense, an anomalous sense, is that there's no objectively true Nick Dungy. There's no objective center as reason, as Plato and Kant understood it, or as a soul, as the theological metaphysics. Well, there are no genetic markers, as the biochemists like to talk about. Culturally, there's no pure origin. And in terms of subjectivity, I use the word author because we like to say, I'm the author of my ideas. I'm the author of my decisions. I'm the author of my intent. I'm the author of my books. We talk like that. I'm in control of my saying. And in some ways, we are in control of our subjectivity. I mean, yes, of course, I signed my name for the mortgage or the loan. Okay. But at the center of it, there's nothing objectively true there. It's decentered. If you were to look for the objective, okay, so where's the objectively true Nick Dungy? Is it in the reason that is a special faculty unique to human beings that has content in there already from God or nature? Is that the true Nick Dungy at the center? Or is it the soul that God put there? So I can be aware and open to divine revelation, and I can do what Jesus would do. Whenever I have an ethical question, I just look at my bracelet. What would Jesus do? Oh, fuck, I do that. From a postmodern point of view, there's no true subjectivity. It's decentered. And 3, Western civilization, the Greek world and Western civilization, as well as subjectivity, is a poem. It's an invention. It's artistic. Nietzsche will say that life is an aesthetic experience. It's an artistic experience. And I mean aesthetic, I mean aesthetic, aesthetic. Right? Meaning art. Meaning invention. It's an aesthetic experience. Consciousness is not a rational experience, thought in terms of Kant or Plato. Life isn't a moral experience, thought in the Christian sense as a soul and the purpose. Life is an aesthetics, an artistic experience. Consciousness is an aesthetic experience. So it's art. It's art, ultimately. It's art ultimately, originally, because somewhere, someone we don't know wrote these damn poems called the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's art. And then ever since, people have been writing poems about the fucking poem and changing the poem. as art and power. And we are the effects and vehicles of the poem. We're in the poem. And all Nietzsche wants you to know, all Foucault wants you to know is be aware you're a poem. You thought you were objectively true. You thought the morality was objectively true. You thought the gender assignment or the race or the ethnicity or the stupidity or the IQ, you thought all that was objectively true. It's a fucking fiction. You're in it. Okay, cool. Now what? All right. If the fiction isn't working, if the fiction's oppressive, if the fiction's making you nihilistic or self-hating or self-loathing or depressed or leading you to off yourself, single greatest, the number one leading cause of death of people your age is fucking suicide. The second leading cause is accidental death from suicide, from attempts of suicide or reckless living. Okay, you're in a poem that's making you sick. You should get woke. All right. Western civilization. There's no pure origin. There's no pure race. There's no pure blood. There's no pure sexuality. All that's a fiction. Race is a fiction. It's construction. Gender is a construction. Cultures are constructions. Ethnicity is a construction. Morality is a construction. No pure this or that. 2, subjectivity is real, but not objectively true. It's decentered. It's incredibly important. I'm glad that I'm Nick Dungy, but I could have been anything else. And even while I'm Nick Dungy, I can be anything I fucking want to do. And 3, Western civilization is a poem. And because it's a poem, because it's an invention, an assertion of power, it's constantly undergoing what? Change. Thank God. Change over what? Agonistic conflicts over what words mean, of what words are words, what they mean. What does their meaning have value, not value? How do we place those things in a hierarchy or a system of purposes? And you and I are always already inside that. When Foucault says, you and I are always already inside relationships of power, opened by language and the words and the meanings and the values associated with it. That's what he's talking about. Consciousness is a space of contested possibilities. Consciousness and subjectivity, the body, the politics, it's a space, it's a kind of a quantum space of words, meanings, and values that are in motion and are contested, that are conflicted. That's what it is. It has no origin, it has no ground, it's not fucking going anywhere true. But that doesn't mean it's not important. Of course it's important. Because in that quantum space of words and meanings and values that are contested is our lives, is who we are, is what we mean, is what we value, who we love, and who wants to oppress us. That's our quantum space. So it's the most important thing to become aware of that human beings can become aware of. And for Nietzsche and Foucault, it's not just the most important thing to become aware of. It's the reason why you must become heroic. Have a sense of where you are. All right. I want to stop here because we need to segue from where we are now into the emergence of Greek tragedy. So I'm going to stop here. I don't want to launch into this, get 10 minutes into it, 8 minutes into it, and then have to stop. So see what I told you today earlier that I thought would be true happens to be untrue. We will have one more lecture on this outline. We'll do it Tuesday. All right. Love you guys very much. Have a great effing weekend. Be fierce. We'll see you Tuesday.
Thank you. Bye.
Next time.
Love you guys.
Number 2.
Bye, Professor.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
Before, so I was gonna ask you,
Mhm.
just so I know I'm in the right track,
Yep.
when you're saying like 1, 2, and 3, we are in the Homeric myths, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And we are on the second page, right? Or the third page?
We are on 1, 2,
Yeah, I said human inventions, right? Assertions of power. I think that's the third page.
3. We are on page 4.